Hi, I'm Christina, and this is a book review of Upgrade by Blake Crouch. So this is a science fiction book and it was published in 2022. This is my second book by this author. I read Recursion by him and I absolutely love that book. It was a definite 5-star read for me and it's one of my favourite science fiction books of all time. So I was very much looking forward to reading this book. It's one of my most anticipated releases of 2022, but I have to say I just didn't enjoy it at all. It was such a disappointment and it was so underwhelming. I think it's probably the most disappointing book of 2022 for me so far, and it's such a shame because I really wanted to love this. I just feel like this didn't have any of the magic that was present in Recursion. It felt like a completely different author had written this story, and I have to say, if it wasn't a Blake Crouch book, I definitely would have DNF'd it. It's about a quarter of the way through, but because it was him, I just had to keep going because I thought there's still time for this to get better and there's still time for the magic of recursion to be found in this story. But I just really didn't like it. So this story is about gene editing and I thought that concept was absolutely wonderful. It's such an interesting topic and there is just so much you could do with that topic, and yet I don't think this story really did anything interesting with it. I thought overall it was quite boring, to be honest. So in this story, our main character is called Logan. He has a wife called Beth and he has a teenage daughter called Ava, and he works for the GPA, which is the Gene Protection Agency. So the GPA is a new type of security services in America. Gene editing is illegal and they have a lot of power in order to detain and prosecute anyone who is found to be gene editing. And this has all come about because of one awful incident where millions and millions and millions of people have died as a result of gene editing. And this was directly related to our main character of Logan because it was his mother who was directly responsible for the Great Starvation and the death of millions and millions of people. So that's the kind of general premise of this story. I won't tell you anything else about the plot at all. But I did not like this story at all. One of the main reasons I didn't like it was I felt absolutely no connection whatsoever to any of these characters in this story. I had no connection to Logan at all. His sister is a large character, his mother, his wife, his daughter, his partner in the GPA. I didn't feel anything for any of them at all. So even some of the scenes that should be quite hard hitting, I felt absolutely nothing at all because I didn't have any connection to these characters, and I think that really was detrimental to my enjoyment of this story. All of the characters felt very one-dimensional. They were very surface level. They didn't feel like real people to me. There was no real depth to really any of them at all. And that was such a shame. I thought the plot itself was a little bit boring and a little bit predictable, to be honest. I think with the topic of something like gene editing, there is so much you could do, and yet it just kind of felt like an action movie but in a book. And I think the thing about that is, if this had have been on the big screen in the cinema, I think it would have come across so much better in that medium. I think reading action sequences in books, it just doesn't have the same impact on the page as it does on the screen. And I just kind of sat there reading more and more action sequences with it not really doing that much for me. I think one of my other criticisms of this is there is a lot of science in here. There's just whole sections where we just list like genes and what the genes do, and it wasn't very interesting to read about that at all. I don't really know why so much of that was included, and I think it kind of felt like Blake Crouch has obviously done a lot of research on genes, very much. You can definitely tell that, but I don't think it really added anything to the story at all. It kind of reminded me of a time where you have revised really thoroughly, you've put so much effort into this exam you're going to sit, and then you get there, you're on the day and you read the question and you have no idea how to answer this question, you don't know what you're trying to say at all. So in a vague attempt to pick up marks, you just kind of regurgitate everything you know about the subject and you just throw it all down on the page, and you're just like hoping for the best. You're hoping to pick up a few marks because you don't know what the question is, you don't know how to answer it, so you just kind of chuck it all out there. That's kind of how it felt to me. It felt like he's done so much research. He really has looked so much into genes, but I feel like it didn't add anything to the story. He just kind of put it down on the page, and it was a lot of just info dumpy kind of information. It wasn't kind of put across in an interesting way. There was just pages where it was like, this is the gene, this is what it does, this is the gene, this is what it does. And yeah, it just didn't work for me. That it didn't work at all. I think the stylistic choices as well, he has a lot of very short sentences. He has paragraphs where it's just a sentence, and it just didn't work for me. Yes, it definitely makes for a very fast-paced read, and it does kind of keep the pacing very high, and you would want that in a kind of like, it's kind of a science fiction thriller as opposed to just science fiction. And I think I was just hoping for a deeper exploration of, you know, gene editing. There's so many interesting things you could talk about. There was one point where he's going to meet someone who's kind of on the criminal side of gene editing, but they kind of allow him to exist because he is useful and profitable with other certain services. So he's allowed to remain practicing what he does. And there was one point where he's gene editing lots of different animals, and one of which is something that he's trying to create, like a dragon type species, obviously to sell and obviously to make a profit. And he's using, the Ramsey Logan thinks, pretty much like little bits of crocodile and little bits of other animals, and he's got this kind of little creature with wings, but it can't fly, but it looks maybe like a dragon might. And I was like, this is really interesting. There was little parts of it I was like, this is a really interesting idea, but it was just like a snippet of a conversation in a greater story. And I thought the general overarching theme of the story was a little bit dull, considering how much you could have done with it. And I just felt no connection to it whatsoever. And later on there was just so many action sequences following action sequences, and then when we did have something that was meant to be hard-hitting, I obviously won't say because it ruins, it's a spoiler, but there's some moments that are meant to hit you hard, and I just had nothing. I felt absolutely nothing. And it was such a shame. And then the epilogue itself, I think the epilogue is meant to be quite hard-hitting, and I didn't really feel anything at all. So yeah, this was just really disappointing for me. I'm gonna give it 2 stars just because it had a really good concept, and there was definitely so much research done on genes here, but this is probably one of the most disappointing science fiction books I've read in a really long time. And if I didn't know that it was Blake Crouch that had written this, I never would have put this on parallel to Recursion. Recursion was just so good, and it had so much heart in it. I felt so connected to those characters. The way in which he'd written his story, it was so interesting, it was so intriguing. I was completely along for the ride. It was like interesting discussions on time and time travel and all of these kind of ideas. And this one again had some really interesting ideas, but it just wasn't executed well. Yeah, I think Recursion had something really special, and it's got a really good place in my heart. I think it's a wonderful book. I have a book review on it if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on it, which I'll leave down below. But yeah, I never would have said that the same person had written this book. So yeah, really disappointing. And I really wanted to enjoy this book. Like I said, it was one of the most anticipated books of the whole year for me. So this was, yeah, just really disappointing. I'm not quite sure what else to say. I think it was just, I was expecting a lot, to be fair, when I was going into it, which may be a little bit unfair, and so maybe I wouldn't have been as harsh had I not been expecting so much. But yeah, I just didn't feel anything for any of these characters. There was times when it kind of just felt like, yes, Logan is meant to be a superhuman, but it didn't really come across the page that he was any better than any other kind of, like, it kind of felt like a little bit like a Jason Bourne movie put into a book, but not as good, if that makes sense. yeah, I think that's how I'd probably sum it up, to be honest. Like a little bit of a knockoff Jason Bourne, and then kind of like other kind of interesting science fiction movies that try and look at all of these types of questions, but it just wasn't done as well. So yeah, really didn't like this one. I'd love to know what you thought of it, if you loved it, if you hated it, if you felt similarly to me. I think I'd also be really interested if this is the first book that you've read by him. What did you think of it? Because I think had I read this one first, I probably just would have put it down about a quarter of the way through, DNF'd it, and that would have been that. I probably wouldn't have read anything else by him, which is a shame. So if you have also read this and you didn't like it, I definitely recommend reading Recursion if you haven't already, because that was just absolutely wonderful. And I'm definitely interested in reading his older works too. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please do like the video if you've liked it, and please do subscribe if you'd like to see more of me talking about books. I'll see you in my next one. Bye.